Hello and welcome to all of my dual enrollment students for my History 201 course. Today, the purpose of this video is going to be to provide further information and context to help us make our analysis for our final exam revolving around the Civil War. Before we begin, let's quickly go over the due dates for all of what my students should be doing for this module. Please remember that the discussion will be due at the end of this week, but also be preparing for the final exam now to ensure that you are successful when the test actually comes. So let's quickly review what we have started talking about with this module in the previous class. We are looking at the United States is now engulfed in a civil war. 70 short years after the nation has been established, their goal to establish liberty and freedom and democracy for all has certainly been a failure in many regards there. Now, for white Americans, it has been a good success, but for everybody else, including African Americans who are enslaved during this time, America has failed to bring them liberty. We started to look at the basis of our analysis, and this slide is a visual representation of what we are analyzing. We are trying to see what was the main reason for this failure. Why did the American nation fail in providing liberty and democracy for all, especially regarding the issue of slavery? Why was it still around? Why did the institution still exist? Why did this result in war? And so you as the students have a choice. You have four ways that you can go about this analysis. Now, the first day we started talking about expansion, greedy expansion. Was the unjustified expansion and rapid expansion of the United States the biggest contributor to the institution of slavery? Today, we're going to be talking about the second path, which is compromise. And compromise may not seem like a big deal, but political compromise may have very well be the reason that you think contributed the most to this failure and the continuation of the institution of slavery. In future days, we will be talking about the excess of democracy. Was the fear of the founding fathers correct years before this failure came to light in a civil war? Or was it purely racism, and not just racism, but racial prejudice there? Was it this falsified idea that inferior races existed justifying such actions there? Well, today we're going to be focusing on compromise. Now, in this video, you are going to see facts that we have already talked about, such as the Louisiana Purchase, Missouri Compromise, so on and so forth. And you're going to think, well, how is this any different than the expansion discussion that we had the other day? Well, remember, that's the beauty of analysis. The beauty of analysis is that two different people can take the same fact and they can make different original ideas based around it and create different arguments about it. So, for instance, let's look at this fact. The Louisiana Purchase led to an increase in plantation slavery. That is an undeniable fact there. Now, student one can say that this shows expansion was the biggest contributor to the issue of slavery. And they can use this same fact and argue it in this way. But student two can take the Louisiana Purchase and say that compromise was the biggest contributor leading to the issue of slavery. And that's what the goal of this video is to provide you context around these facts so that you can make these original arguments on your own. To begin with, just like with expansion, the argument of compromise can go all the way back to the very beginning of the official independent United States with the Constitution here. So in 1787 through 1788, when the founding fathers are coming together to create the Constitution, many of the founders are very aware that slavery was a direct threat to liberty. Now, the southern states are coming into the Constitution, ensuring that slavery is protected. But for the northern congressmen and delegates coming in, they are trying to address this question. How can we truly establish our mission to create a free nation of liberty and democracy while the institution of slavery exists here. There were many founding fathers who were very vocal on this issue. If you look with me on page 264 in our textbooks here, on 264 there's a section called the debate over slavery. Founders such as James Madison and even Thomas Jefferson were very vocal on this issue. Jefferson was even recorded saying the most oppressive dominion ever exercised by man was the institution of slavery. Now, Thomas Jefferson was not present at the Constitutional Convention. He was away as a foreign minister there, foreign representative for the United States during this time. But his very close companion, James Madison, had the same ideas about slavery here. Now, here is how the person arguing compromise gets their first factual piece of evidence as early as the Constitution. Look on page 264 and you see an old topic we have talked about, and I have a picture over here. It's called the 3/5 clause. That's one name for it. But another name for this, many historians call it this, 3/5 compromise. So as early as the Constitution, the founders of the United States were compromising over the issues of slavery. So to keep the Southern delegates happy, despite their ideas and despite their hatred for the institution of slavery, the 3/5 clause or compromise was allowed to enter the Constitution, and this compromise counted slaves as 3/5 of people, completely contradictory to the United States goal that they claimed all the way at the beginning of the Declaration of Independence. If their goal really was to bring liberty and justice and freedom and equality to all men, they weren't doing a very good job of it, because the African Americans were not even given rights. And not only were they not given rights from the Constitution, they were counted 3/5 of a person. Now, here is how compromise can begin to be argued. So look at this little blue pop-up bubble right here. Ask yourself this question: what would have happened if the founders refused to compromise right at this very moment? What if they had pressed the issue and they had told the Southern slave owners or told the Southern delegates, no, we are not compromising over this issue. Slavery is not going to be found in the Constitution, nor is it going to be protected in any way, shape, form, or fashion. Slavery is going to be outlawed. The founders had every opportunity to address the issue here. Now, what was their fears? They had fears that the Southern states would not join the Union, that they would not ratify the Constitution. And essentially what would have happened is that all the Southern states would have become like miniature independent nations there. They wanted a strong union. They wanted all the original 13 colonies, and because of that, they compromised. Now, just like we're going to see in the Missouri Compromise, some people will look at the 3/5 clause and say, well, look at our previous delegates. Look at how well they got along. No, this is not a good compromise. Whenever we're having a compromise about something that's wrong, that never makes that compromise okay. Something that's half wrong will never be half wrong. It will always be fully wrong. So think about these as you are picking compromise for your arguments here. It began at the Constitution. Now, moving on from the Constitution, let's look at the two first waves of American expansion, which would be the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, and then also the Louisiana Purchase there. Now, Thomas Jefferson, although he was not a part of the Constitutional Convention because he was away serving in the United States there, he was a part in the two expansions of the United States early on. It's interesting because he would be president during the Louisiana expansion there. Now, in 1787, as American settlers are heading into the Ohio River Valley here in the Old Northwest, Thomas Jefferson is the one who drafts the No Slavery Clause of the Northwest Ordinance there. Now, many of you may be sitting here thinking, you say, okay, well, this shows that compromise isn't a very strong argument because Jefferson didn't compromise. When given the keys, Jefferson did not compromise there. But an argument can very well still be made that Jefferson and the founders did compromise on this ordinance. If the founders were able to insert a no slavery clause in this territory, why did they stop? Why did they stop at the Ohio River Valley? They very well knew that they had all the intentions of continuing to expand, no matter who lay in the West Coast past the Mississippi River before the Louisiana Purchase. Why not insert a clause here and stick to the principle that slavery was not going to expand past the 13 original colonies? However, a compromise is taken to not upset the Southern slave owners and the Southern states and the Southern delegates. Slavery was not addressed for the rest of the nation. It was only confined to the Northwest Ordinance, really in the North Ohio River Valley there. Many historians view this as the first compromise of Jefferson on slavery here. However, we fast forward in time, and now it is the 1800s, and Jefferson is now President Jefferson. And he is also going to be in charge when America gets its second wave of expansion, but also so large of an expansion that it doubles the nation, the Louisiana Purchase. Now, again, you may be thinking, well, this is about expansion. Actually, it's not. This fact can be used for expansion or compromise or both or any other way. That's the part of analysis. But look on page 309. So I'm on page 309, and let's look at an important fact about the Louisiana Purchase that help us understand why compromise may be a good place for us to argue here. When Thomas Jefferson effectively doubles the size of the United States overnight, he could have very well inserted a clause, just like he did into the Northwest Ordinance, that outlawed slavery as an institution in this part of the nation, because American settlers were going to quickly move in there. However, Jefferson is going to compromise here. Because you see, Jefferson was elected by who? He was elected by agrarian Southern farmers there, a fact that he and James Madison were very aware of there. And because he knew that his voter base was the one that elected him, he compromised in his principles against the institution of slavery, and he did not address the issue of slavery within the Louisiana Purchase. If you look on page 309, Jefferson was more concerned about securing the agrarian character of the Republic, even if that meant the institution of slavery was allowed to spread into the Louisiana Territory. This is a compromise there. Although it doesn't say the word compromise, the person arguing this has plenty of evidence to say, clearly we see that Thomas Jefferson and the others had the chance to stop slavery at multiple events in the early American Republic, yet chose to compromise instead of stay to their true beliefs about the institution of slavery. Now, here is where the person arguing compromise will have a very easy time finding evidence and facts to help make their argument in this light. Because Thomas Jefferson and others did not address the issue of slavery in the Louisiana Territory, in 1820, just a few years after this territory has been acquired, the issue of slavery is going to come center stage with a new state trying to enter the Union, which was the state of Missouri. So if you look over here to the right side of your screen, you see a very good visual of the previous slide. Every state in blue, especially where my mouse cursor is, this was the Northwest Ordinance here. Slavery is outlawed. But if you look down here in the South, especially with the new Southern states after the War of 1812, the Louisiana Purchase clearly not addressing slavery there, and now slavery has expanded, and so the two zones have met. And now the state of Missouri wants to enter, and we are going to get one of the most important compromises in United States history. Many people will look at this compromise today and they will say, well, look at how our congressmen and our representatives used to get along. That is not correct when talking about the context of slavery. We should never want to compromise over something that is completely wrong. There's a very famous saying, and it's not mine. something that's half wrong is still fully wrong. And so this is not a very good example of compromise for our delegates to look at today. This was a very terrible thing that's going to factually lead to the increase in tensions of slavery here. Now, when Missouri is wanting to enter into the Union there, they clearly want to be a slave state. Now, I'm on page 378 here. And we already see, if you read 378 through 379, you will see that Missouri settlers have already entered the state and they own slaves already. And now the issue is brought back up. The failure of compromise has now made it to where slavery is not only expanding, the southern states are getting more and more bold and more defiant against anti-slavery laws. Instead of addressing the issue here, instead of facing it head on, the Missouri Compromise was enacted. And what did the Missouri Compromise do? Well, it allowed Missouri to enter in as a slave state while allowing Maine to enter in as a free state there. Again, on paper, this looks like a victory, but in reality, this was a terrible compromise for the person trying to argue this. This is just a field day for you. This was a terrible compromise because you're not actually addressing the issue of slavery. You are compromising to it there. So for the person going down this path, the Missouri Compromise and the other things we've talked about, great pieces of factual evidence for you to make your analysis. And ask yourself this question right here. At what point had the nation reached the point of no return? Some will argue it's the Missouri Compromise. You could argue that. Some will argue that it came from the 3/5 clause in the Constitution. But at some point you have to understand that in 1861, they didn't just wake up one morning and say, I want to have a civil war. These issues had been present long before, and we had reached this point of no return long before any bullet was fired in the Civil War there. And now we are on to our last slide for the idea of compromise. And it is clear by 1850 that compromise can be argued to be the biggest contributor to the issue of slavery and the failure of the United States. What started out as a territory instituting slavery or one state entering the Union, now a whole plethora of territories and states are bringing up the issue of slavery simultaneously. America has been very successful in their war against Mexico, and they have essentially doubled the size of the United States yet again, getting not only several pieces of territory in New Mexico, but also in Utah. Oregon has been gained, and a dispute with the British has been figured out there. California has been gained, and now America has found themselves in the middle of a huge issue here. So much new land, and because of the Missouri Compromise and Southern delegates being more bold, many Southerners believe that this new territory acquired by Mexico from the war, many of it's going to be slave territory. But the Northern delegates are trying their hardest to ensure that slavery doesn't spread. But you see, if I'm arguing compromise is the biggest issue, then I'm going to argue at 1850 it's too late. It's too late to stop it at this point. Now the South is too bold. They're too rooted. The institution is too strong there. That even if the North was to deny it, you could probably have the Civil War 10 years early. But it's important that we look at the last big compromise that is taken in the 1850s here. And so in the Missouri Compromise, we learned yesterday, and we learned in the previous slide, that Missouri was allowed to enter in as a slave state. But right on the southern border of Missouri is the 36th parallel there. And this parallel was a line that the people in 1820 said could be used for further slave expansion. Remember, we've discussed this in the previous class. And it was supposed to be that all states below the 36th parallel would remain slave, whereas all states north in the future would not be slave states there. But that has not worked out very well for them. And yet again, here is this issue. We have California trying to enter in as a state. We have Texas, who has joined the United States Union, who was previously independent. And Texas is very clearly a slavery state. It was safeguarded in their Constitution, and they made it very clear. So now we've got to play this game again, where we have to make sure that we compromise. And this is called the Compromise of 1850. So I'm on page 494. And on 494, we can look at the Great Debate and even the fugitive slave issue from 494 to 496 there. And when California and these territories from Mexico try to enter into the Union, another final compromise is taken. Well, what was the Compromise of 1850? Well, here we go. It's been paraphrased at the bottom here. California is brought in as a free state, while allowing other territories in the future, they will be allowed to use popular sovereignty to determine the presence of slavery. Meaning, and we'll get to this in another class, meaning that the settlers and the citizens of those territories will get to vote if they want the institution of slavery. And that is a huge, 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 huge issue for the Northern Republicans who are trying to stop the spread of slavery. Because now the federal government is not determining what's best for these territories to stop that. Now, citizens from anywhere can migrate in and continue to spread the institution of slavery. But you have to ask, at this point, how had slavery grown due to these numerous compromises? If I'm the person arguing compromise, could I not argue right here that the reason why the Northern Republicans and those who were against slavery found themselves in this situation was that instead of containing slavery to the original 13 colonies here, they allowed it to continue because of compromise. A person trying to argue this for their final exam would have a whole plethora of factual evidence and historical events to argue that these continued compromises is what allowed the institution of slavery to continue. So I hope that this video helps you there. I hope that you'll continue to read in the chapter there. We obviously did not cover everything here in chapter 13 and 14, but for the person arguing compromise, be looking at these historical facts when making your analysis.